The story of how Washington, D.C. became the capital of the United States is a tale deeply rooted in compromise, vision, political struggle, and the founding ideals of a young republic. When the United States declared its independence in 1776, it had no official capital. The Continental Congress met in various cities during and after the Revolutionary War, including Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, and Princeton. But as the war concluded and the country sought to establish a permanent government under the newly ratified Constitution in 1789, the need for a fixed and neutral capital became clear. The Constitution itself left the question of the capital unresolved, but it gave Congress the authority to establish a federal district. The key issue was where to place it. Regional rivalry played a major role in the debate. Northern states like New York and Pennsylvania, which had already served as temporary capitals, pushed to retain the honor. Southern states, on the other hand, were concerned about economic and political dominance by the North. This led to fierce debate in the halls of the new Congress until a compromise was reached in 1790, one that would change American history forever. Known as the Residence Act, this agreement was part of what historians now call the Compromise of 1790. It was brokered during a private dinner among Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. The deal was simple, in exchange for Southern support for Hamilton's financial plan to assume state debts, the capital would be moved to a site along the Potomac River, in land donated by Maryland and Virginia, the idea was to locate the new capital in a place that was neither too northern nor too southern. A neutral location that could serve as the symbolic and political heart of the young republic. President George Washington himself chose the exact location for the new city in 1791. He selected a tract of land along the Potomac River, near his Mount Vernon estate. This location had both symbolic and practical appeal. It was centrally located among the original 13 states, accessible via waterways and far enough inland to be defensible in case of foreign attack. The land included parts of Maryland and Virginia, and it was ceded by both states to create the federal district, an area that would not be part of any state, ensuring its political neutrality. The new city was named Washington in honor of the nation's first president, and the broader territory was called the District of Columbia, with Columbia being a poetic name for the United States. To design the city, Washington commissioned a French-born architect and engineer named Pierre Charles L'Enfant. L'Enfant envisioned a grand capital inspired by the great cities of Europe, with wide boulevards, open public spaces, and majestic buildings, his plan laid out a grid intersected by broad diagonal avenues, with the Capitol building as the focal point. At the heart of L'Enfant's plan was the idea that the city should reflect the values of the Republic: openness, visibility, accessibility. But L'Enfant's ambitious vision soon clashed with the practical limitations of the time. Landowners were reluctant to sell or cooperate. Funds were limited, political tensions ran high. Eventually, L'Enfant was dismissed from the project in 1792, and his assistant, Andrew Ellicott, revised and completed the plan. Despite the setbacks, construction began, the Capitol and the White House were among the first major buildings to rise, though both were unfinished when the government officially moved to Washington in 1800. President John Adams was the first to occupy the White House, and Congress convened in the still unfinished Capitol. The new Capitol was more symbolic than functional in its early years. The city was sparsely populated, the streets were muddy, and many buildings were incomplete. Still, it represented a bold statement, a purpose-built capital for a new nation that dared to break from monarchy and chart its own democratic path. Over the years, Washington, D.C. evolved, shaped by history, war, expansion, and progress. During the War of 1812, as the city faced its greatest test when British forces invaded and set fire to many of its most important buildings, as including the Capitol and the White House. The destruction was devastating, but it also galvanized the American spirit. Reconstruction began quickly, and the city emerged even stronger. In the decades that followed, Washington continued to grow, both in population and in national importance. The completion of the Washington Monument in 1884 and the Lincoln Memorial in 1922 turned the Capitol into a city of iconic landmarks. The layout of the National Mall began to take shape as a ceremonial core of the city, reflecting the ideals of democracy and unity. But Washington, D.C. was not just a stage for federal power. It was also a community of people. African Americans, immigrants, civil servants, and activists who shaped the city's culture and identity. For much of its early history, D.C. lacked voting representation in Congress and was governed directly by federal authorities. Residents had little say in their local affairs. Despite this, Washington became a focal point for movements that sought to expand democracy and civil rights. In the 20th century, as Washington witnessed some of the most powerful protests and demonstrations in American history, the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom brought over 250,000 people to the Lincoln Memorial, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has delivered his legendary "I Have a Dream" speech. Decades later, the city would see massive gatherings for women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and justice reform. Meanwhile, the city's political role deepened. Washington, D.C. became not just the capital of the United States, but the nerve center of global diplomacy and governance. The presence of the White House, Congress, the Supreme Court, and numerous federal agencies made it the ultimate seat of American power. Foreign embassies, think tanks, as international organizations and media outlets established their headquarters in D.C., turning the city into a global hub of influence. In more recent years, debates over the rights of D.C. residents have gained momentum. With over 700,000 residents, more than some states, the people of Washington, D.C. still lack full representation in Congress. The push for D.C. statehood has become a significant political issue, as residents demand equal rights and autonomy. The city's motto, "Taxation without representation," displayed on its license plates, reflects the ongoing struggle for democratic inclusion. The modern capital is a far cry from the muddy, incomplete city of 1800. Today, Washington, D.C., as is a vibrant metropolis with world-class museums, universities, and cultural institutions. It's a city of neighborhoods, from historic Georgetown to Lively U Street, each with its own story and character. It remains a symbol of American ideals, contradictions, and aspirations. Washington, D.C., as is more than just a location on the map. It's the living embodiment of a nation's journey from revolution to republic, from division to unity, from vision to reality. Its history is still being written every day, as it continues to serve as the epicenter of American democracy and a mirror of the country's hopes and challenges. Understanding how Washington, D.C. was born is to understand how the United States came to define itself. A capital forged not just by architects and presidents, but by compromise, conflict, courage, and the enduring pursuit of a more perfect union.